Welcome to Counterpoint. I'm Tanya Granick-Allen. With the Alberta provincial election only 3 months away, the governing United Conservative Party, led by Premier Danielle Smith, tabled their budget. In a nutshell, the budget will see spending of $66 billion with an expected surplus of $10.4 billion projected for 2022 to 2023. The significant portion of that surplus will be used to pay down the provincial debt, something which we don't always hear about in provincial budgets. How refreshing. But what about program spending and cuts? While the government is increasing spending by $1 billion in things like healthcare, opposition NDP is saying that that is not enough relative to population growth. So what exactly did the budget contain? Is this a typical election budget, bloated and full of treats for potential voters? Were there areas where the government ought to invest more or perhaps show even more restraint? Well, joining me now to unpack it is the Alberta budget is Kris Sims, Alberta Director with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Kris, thank you so much for joining us today. Always a treat to have you on, especially as we discuss our favorite thing, budgets. So let's just, at an overall, we're going to delve obviously very well into the details, but overall, was this a good budget?
Yes, it was an excellent budget, and we're really happy to be able to say that. I don't know how many budgets I have covered, both as a journalist and later on as the Taxpayers Federation Director in British Columbia, and usually it's just a massive headache. They're talking about hiking taxes, we're talking about massive debts, we're talking about all those problems, but this time around, it was really refreshing because, yes, spending is up, and usually that would get, my ponytail in a knot. But the spending is up because we have a surplus. And now for folks who are saying, well, you only have a surplus because of oil and gas revenues. Yes, that's a good point. But what was great about this budget, Tanya, is that it brought forward a whole bunch of rules and spending restraint for the future that we have been asking for now for decades, including balanced budget legislation. And get this, any future spending increases now must be tied to the rate of population growth and inflation from the year before.
And as and some of our viewers might respond with, well, shouldn't have always been? Isn't that normally how people, budget in a family? We have another child, therefore the budget has to be tied to that population growth.
I know, right? It's kind of common sense, but unfortunately it's not that common, especially when you're looking to the federal government for some form of leadership. I mean, they've just thrown the responsibility book out the window in Ottawa. They said the budget will balance themselves. Forgive me if I don't think about monetary policy. We'll grow the economy from the heart outwards. I mean, it's basically like a frat party level of fiscal management in Ottawa. So we have to be able to look to our provincial capitals for responsibility, common sense, and leadership. And this is the first time that I can remember in a long time where we've seen this kind of restraint. And not only is it balanced budget legislation and future spending restraint, but they even went after the surplus. They have now determined that 50% of the surplus, cash surplus, must now be put upon the debt, paying it down. And the other remaining 50% still has to go to debt repayment, into the Heritage Savings Trust Fund that we have here in Alberta, or onto one-time spending that doesn't increase it overall.
Okay, this is all very interesting. I want to go back to the population pegging increase in spending to population growth. From what I gather, the NDP opposition under, again, Rachel Notley, former premier, she actually was critical, saying that it's actually not pegged, or from what I understood, she was criticizing it being pegged and not being pegged properly to that, and that in fact the per person spending ought to increase already, and it's not good enough.
Well, spending is up across the board. I was running my finger down the column of expenses on the budget. It's tough to find any number that's gone down. So we're trying to practice restraint here with our criticism of the budget as well, because we've seen so much restraint for future budgets. But boy, oh boy, they've taken the surplus, they plunked the biggest ever payment down on the debt, and they're spending a lot of the rest of it. So spending is up. I'm kind of surprised. I guess I'm not that surprised that the NDP opposition is saying they're not spending enough, because they love spending. If you take a look at the NDP government across the Rockies in British Columbia, they managed to turn a several $billion surplus into a deficit over there. It's
Oh
just
my
by
goodness.
like awful magic. And so, yeah, we know it's their job to criticize, so they have to oppose something. But spending increases probably shouldn't be it
Okay, I'm
here.
going to take this moment as the one time a Canadian Taxpayers Federation director is allotting spending increases. We'll pick this up.
Stop the press. We're
We'll
happy with this budget.
we'll be back just in just a few moments.